It is fascinating to observe how a palace of bursts of laughter can turn into a sanctuary of silence. Louis de Funès, the genius who once made the entire hexagon explode with joy, ended his life sheltered behind the imposing ramparts of a property now relegated to the dustbin of history. It was in this haven that he escaped the frenzy of fame, tended his flowerbeds with manic precision, penned endless letters, and finally exhaled his last breath. But what really happened beyond those massive gates? How could this artist, adored by millions and an undisputed icon of French cinema, leave behind such a meager, almost non-existent inheritance? Let us explore the secrets of Louis de Funès's hidden life, this man beyond the laughter, spanning humble origins, meteoric rise, impenetrable retreats, clandestine romances, heart alerts, chaotic estate management, and a legacy that still sparks controversy in 2025, over 4 decades after his departure. Louis Germain David de Funès de Galarza was born on July 31, 1914, in Courbevoie, a suburb of Paris, into a family of Iberian exiles struggling to integrate into their host country. His father, Carlos Luis de Funès de Galarza, a fallen Andalusian lawyer, had fled Spain to escape insurmountable debts. His mother, Leonor Soto Reguera, descended from modest Galician aristocracy and possessed a steely temperament. Louis grew up frail and reserved, often mocked for his slight stature, 1.64 m as an adult, and his speech tinged with southern inflections that made him seem like an outsider. It was impossible to imagine in this self-conscious child, who hid in his mother's skirts during Sunday meals, the future comedic colossus capable of triggering fits of laughter in entire crowds. Yet these childhood torments shaped the physical expressiveness that became his signature, those wide-eyed stares, extravagant contortions, and jerky movements that amplified human flaws to the grotesque. His early years, spent in cramped apartments between the 2 world wars, a dark 2-room flat on Rue de Clignancourt, then a tiny 3-room in Saint-Mandé, sharpened his keen eye for everyday pettiness, bourgeois vanities, social absurdities, and irrational anxieties. All elements he would later magnify on screen with unmatched mastery, transforming the average person into an irresistible caricature. Unlike many stars who ignite early, Louis waited until his 40s to step into the spotlight. During World War II, reformed for physical frailty, he survived by tickling the ivories in smoky Paris cabarets, the Boeuf sur la Toit, the Caveau de la Huchette, lampooning wealthy patrons for a few crumpled bills and a glass of red wine. Anonymous and penniless, he nonetheless had a prodigious talent for parodying those around him. The pot-bellied owner, the flirtatious waitress, the arrogant German officer. One twilight in 1945, Providence intervened. Emerging from the Châtelet metro station, he bumped into actor Daniel Jellin, who, stunned by an improvised parody, offered him a minor role in La Tentation de Barbizon. This fateful coincidence sealed his cinematic baptism. For nearly 2 decades, he lingered as a secondary figure, a cafe waiter here, a shopkeeper there, a hysterical office clerk, a clumsy thief. But he seized every scene with devouring vitality. Critics labeled him excessive, crude, too plebeian for elite film archives. The public, however, saw raw truth and visceral closeness. In the early 1960s, a resurgent France, in the midst of the Trente Glorieuses boom, proved ripe for his ascension. In 1963, he finally landed the lead in Pouic Pouic. The following year exploded an irresistible triad, Le Gendarme de Saint-Tropez, Fantomas, Le Cornillot. In just 6 months of 1964, he chained 3 triumphs totaling over 20 million admissions, a feat neither Belmondo nor Delon ever matched in so little time. What set de Funès apart was his deliberate refusal to play the magnetic hero or irresistible seducer. He embodied the petty despotic boss, the tormented father, the nitpicking bureaucrat we despise yet who mirrors us. These figures were fearful, envious, addicted to domination, but always redeemed by a poignant glimmer of humanity. Historian Bertrand Dickel dubbed him the Pulcinella of contemporary France. A being of paradoxes, half dictator, half child. He was not born a star and never craved fame. His dream, he confided in a rare interview with Paris Match in 1970, was simply to excel among supporting roles. Supreme irony, this modesty propelled him to mythic status. The only French comedian since Charlie Chaplin whose works still unite 4 generations before the small screen, from grandparents to toddlers, every holiday season on TF1 or France 2. By the mid-1970s, Louis de Funès had it all. Public apotheosis, astronomical fees, 7 figures per film, and abysmal weariness. His name alone filled cinemas and shattered attendance records, but in private, he yearned for the most radical isolation. Following 2 severe heart attacks in March 1975, the first on the set of Léal ou la Cuisse, the second days later at home, he was ordered to reinvent his life. Cardiologists demanded rest, slowdown, abandonment of his pathological perfectionism. For someone addicted to total control, from script to direction, costumes to lines, this was a ruthless sentence, almost bodily treason. He abandoned Paris and settled permanently at the Château de Clermont, an 18th-century manor perched above the Loire in the quiet village of Lucelier, about 15 kilometers from Nantes. He had acquired it years earlier thanks to the phenomenal success of La Grande Vadrouille, over 17 million admissions in 1966, but only after his collapse did it become his definitive asylum. There, surrounded by hybrid tea roses he pruned himself, muscadet vines he harvested with his sons, and 40 hectares of wooded estate with a fish-filled pond, France's most illustrious farcer transformed into a passionate horticulturist. He spent hours shaping fruit trees into espaliers, sowing tulip bulbs imported from Holland, feeding stale bread to his waterfowl by the pond. Locals in Lucelier often spotted him strolling alone on the gravel paths, hands clasped behind his back, thoughtful, a Panama hat on his head and rubber clogs on his feet. Even in this oasis of calm, he remained haunted by the echo of his own aura. Guests were handpicked. He politely but firmly turned away reporters, avoided neighbors at Sunday Mass, and admitted only his wife Jean Barthélemy de Maupassant and their sons Patrick and Olivier into his private world. Jean, a resolute woman, fierce and authoritarian guardian, orchestrated every aspect of his career, contracts, scripts, even the choice of female co-stars to play his on-screen wife. It was she who imposed Claude Gensac as his recurring partner, out of absolute trust. Behind Clermont's walls, the couple projected exemplary harmony, but the truth was more nuanced. Jean ruled the household with military rigor while Louis escaped into creative effort, faith, and later, a clandestine sanctuary. In the 1960s, during a radio event in the capital, he met Macha Berenger, a young host renowned for her empathy and magnetism. Their connection turned into a lasting, passionate but hidden affair. He rented a modest suite at the Hotel Intercontinental for their rendezvous. For over a decade, their romance remained concealed from the public, known only to a tight circle. When Jean eventually discovered it, she chose silence over confrontation. At Clermont, Louis found serenity but also remorse. Fearing heavenly punishment, he recited prayers daily and clung to his work as absolution. Despite medical warnings, he returned to the studios with Léal ou la Cuisse in 1976, then La Soupe aux Choux and La Zizanie. Each production was meticulously controlled. No night shoots, no extended travel, mandatory 2-hour naps. The comedy persisted, but the man behind it faded gradually. The once vibrant chateau sank into a quietude that only life's departure left behind. On the cusp of the 1980s, Louis de Funès was both a living myth and a vulnerable being. The king of French humor moved more slowly, smiled less, and masked his pain behind iron discipline. Every exertion on set came at a cost: chest tightness, trembling hands, labored breathing. Yet he refused to lay down arms. "As long as the public laughs, I cannot die," he declared. But fate tightened inexorably. In January 1983, he escaped with Jean and family to the Arcs ski resort in Savoy. He hated the cold but cherished time with his granddaughter Julia, learning to ski. His loved ones recalled him looking gaunt, pale, quickly exhausted. Though he joked about the invigorating mountain air, the trip, meant to revive him, drained him instead. Back at their beloved Château de Clermont, Louis struggled to climb the stairs. On the evening of January 27, 1983, after a peaceful day at home, he complained of dizziness and chest pressure. Jean helped him lie down. Moments later, he collapsed. At 8:30 p.m., at Nantes Hospital, the great Louis de Funès was pronounced dead, victim of a massive heart attack. He was 68. His passing struck France like thunder. No one was prepared for this loss, neither the audiences fed on his antics in Rabbi Jacob and Le Gendarme, nor the new generations rediscovering him weekly on television. The government offered a national tribute, but Jean declined. She favored sobriety, restraint, reflection. The funeral took place at the village church in Lucelier, near the lawyer he loved so much. Only a few close friends attended: Michel Galabru, Colette Brosset, Christian Fechner, and a handful of locals who had seen him wandering the woods. No cameras, no eulogies, just the murmur of prayers and the tolling of bells. He was buried in Lucelier's modest cemetery, overlooking the Loire Valley. On his grave, no grand epitaph, just his name and the dates of his life. For Jean, it was his wish: modesty, discretion, peace. But one person never received timely notice: his eldest son Daniel, from his first marriage to Germaine Caroyer. Long excluded from family life, Daniel learned the news on the radio. Neither invited to the funeral nor mentioned in the will. He left me nothing, not a word, not a coin, not even a goodbye. But I survived. I built my life, he would later confide. When Louis de Funès was laid to rest, France mourned not just a man, but an era. The laughter that had united the nation echoed still, fading in the corridors of his now-deserted chateau. When an artist entertains millions, we assume he dies wealthy. That was not the case for Louis de Funès. Despite over 50 feature films and more than 100 million box office admissions in his career, he left no financial legacy upon his death in 1983. His passing revealed not only the loss of a beloved performer but a mystery. How could one of France's most lucrative actors leave nothing to his heirs? The answer lies in his professional management. Louis de Funès trusted no one in the industry, not producers, studios, or lawyers. Having known youthful poverty, he was obsessed with control and ready cash. According to Bertrand Dickel, he showed extreme caution. Like all who endured scarcity, he demanded fair pay. But once the fee was set, he wanted it up front. Unlike most peers, he always preferred a flat payment over percentages on future profits. This ensured immediate security but killed any ongoing revenue. The choice proved costly. His films, still aired annually on French channels, generate tens of millions of euros for entities like Gaumont, which, per Le Figaro, earns about 500,000 euros yearly from these classics. None of this benefits his rights holders. His family, widow Jean and sons Patrick and Olivier, inherited only the fees earned in his lifetime. Louis was not destitute, but his wealth lay in tangible assets, not royalties. His major purchase was the Château de Clermont, bought in the late 1960s from La Grande Vedril proceeds. The 40-hectare property of vines, forests, and gardens along the Loire became both haven and prison. After his death, Jean inherited part of it, but maintaining such an estate proved impossible. In 1986, just 3 years later, the chateau was sold to an association aiding the disabled. Even today, fans flock to Lucelier, convinced it still belongs to the family, but the reality is harsher. It no longer does. The home once alive with laughter is now a shared artist residency, while its former private park fuels endless disputes over land rights and preservation. In a way, his financial path mirrors his characters: brilliant, tumultuous, perpetually in motion, and ultimately felled by its own inconsistencies. He gave everything to his art but never lingered on the business around it. Ultimately, Louis de Funès did not die penniless. He died fulfilled. But his fortune, like his laughter, belonged to the collective. Behind the laughs and applause, Louis de Funès led a double life woven with rigor, mysteries, and emotional turmoil. To the public, he was a flawless husband to Jean Barthélemy de Maupassant, his second wife with whom he shared over 40 years of marriage. But behind closed doors, the truth was more twisted. His union with Jean brought stability but demanded total control. She oversaw every career decision, approved scripts, chose collaborators, even the women he acted opposite. Jean's dominance made her both sentinel and jailer. But before Jean, there was another woman and another son. In 1936, long before fame, Louis married Germaine Caroy. He lived modestly in a 10-square-meter apartment above a café in Saint-Étienne, struggling to pay rent while playing piano in bars. Their son Daniel was born in 1937 as the couple crumbled. In 1942, Louis left for Paris to chase his dream. The divorce was finalized, and with Jean's arrival soon after, Daniel was quietly erased from the public family image. For decades, Daniel lingered in the shadow of a father he admired but could not approach. He later recounted that Louis visited in secret, bringing jazz records and drawings, leaving before Jean noticed. "He came to see me covertly," Daniel said. "He taught me to draw. He made me laugh, but I was a secret child." When Louis died in 1983, Daniel learned it on the radio. Uninvited, unrecognized, forgotten. "He left me nothing," he said bitterly, "but I survived." Daniel died in turn in 2017 at 80 from a heart attack, the same fate as his father. Even in his official family, Louis's relationships were complex. His son Patrick, a doctor, described his father as loving but authoritarian. He meddled in everything. The younger Olivier, who appeared with him in 6 films, later left cinema to become an airline pilot, escaping his father's suffocating legacy. Yet Olivier never spoke with resentment. In a 2000 interview he acknowledged, "He could be difficult, even obsessive, but deeply human. He taught me dignity. Even if exploited, do your work well. The boomerang always comes back." And then there was Mathieu Bérenger, the voice that comforted him in secret. Their relationship, starting around 1960, lasted over a decade. They met at Paris radio events where Mathieu hosted late-night shows on loneliness and love. For Louis, living in constant anxiety, she was warmth. He kept a small hotel suite in Paris just for her, a quiet place far from cameras and control. When Jean discovered the affair, she said nothing but began following him everywhere, even to sets. Mathieu, sensing the silent war, withdrew gracefully. She died in 2009 without ever speaking publicly of their love. Louis de Funès made millions laugh, but his private life was built on silence. The silence of secrets, guilt, and loves never fully lived. Over 40 years after his death, Louis de Funès's former home, the Château de Clermont in Lucelier, stands on the lawyer's edge, surrounded by the same silent woods he once roamed. But what was once his personal paradise has become a battlefield of bureaucracy, nostalgia, and forgotten memories. The grand estate where he died no longer belongs to his family. In 1986, just 3 years after his passing, Jean de Funès sold it to an organization helping the disabled, unable to maintain the vast 18th-century domain and its 40 hectares of parkland. The chateau later became a semi-public space, both artist residency and historic site. But time has not been kind. The gardens Louis tended himself have overgrown. The vines have fallen silent, and the house has slowly lost its soul. Yet the real conflict stems not from decay but from land disputes. In 2024, the vast wooded park surrounding the estate, once Louis's most intimate refuge, was suddenly put up for sale by its owner. Locals feared privatization and fencing. Rumors of a horse farm or luxury development sparked outrage in Lucelier, a town of barely 4,000. Associations like Regard Nature and Sur les Traces de Louis de Funès, created in his honor, mobilized thousands to protest. Letters, petitions, appeals. They demanded the land remain public. For them, it was not just a park, it was living history, the last trace of a man who made France laugh so much. After all, he let us walk there to pick flowers, recalled Marilyn David, one of the activists. By late 2024, the Safer de Pays de la lawyer, backed by WWF and the Nature Conservancy, preempted the sale for €1.2 million, promising to preserve biodiversity and keep it open. But even this victory had complications. The original buyer challenged the preemption in court, adding another chapter of uncertainty. Today, the park's future remains undecided. Farmers, vintners, and ecologists all want a stake. What should have been a peaceful legacy continues to divide, as if Louis's own perfectionist spirit refuses to rest in peace. Yet despite the turmoil, his presence endures. His films, La Grande Vedrille, Rabbi Jacob, Léo ou la Cuisse, Le Gendarme, air every year, drawing millions of viewers. His face, gestures, voice are part of France's collective memory. Bertrand Dickel once said, "Put 4 generations in front of a Louis de Funès film, and they'll all laugh together." That may be the greatest legacy he left. Not money or property, but unity, the shared laughter between grandparents and children. Over 40 years after his death, the house where Louis de Funès lived and died still echoes with his spirit. Sometimes at peace, sometimes tormented. His fortune vanished, his chateau changed hands, but his laughter lives on in every home that still watches him today. Do you think Louis de Funès cared more about leaving material wealth or the gift of joy? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to discover more untold stories of cinema legends, don't forget to give a thumbs up, share, and subscribe, because behind every smile, there's a story worth telling.